Your free trial now.
I'm gonna stick like glue. Stick because I'm stuck on you.
You've heard the expression, curiosity killed the cat. Well, in this case, curiosity nearly cost a dog his head. A California family got a shock when they saw their family pet Bam Bam with his head stuck in a spare tire. The family has no clue how it happened. They tried soap and water in hopes of setting Bam Bam free, but wound up calling the fire department for help. Fire crews came in, cut the wheel, and safely freed the dog. And that's how Fox reports this Saturday, February 23rd. I'm John Scott. Thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, General Jack Keane. How are you, sir?
Good to see you, Mark.
I've watched you for a few years now, and you're exceptional, which is why I wanted to have you on this program. You know, we get caught up in a lot of the domestic politics, the wall, the government shut. That's all very important. But so is foreign policy, so is national security, so is military policy. And I wanted to have you here to focus in on a few subjects. First of all, I want the public to know a little bit more about you. You're a graduate of the Army War College and the Command and General Staff College. You're a four-star general. There are not a lot of four-star generals. You're the second one I've met in my entire life. You completed over 37 years of public service in December 2003, culminating in your appointment as Acting Chief of Staff and Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. You have a career as a infantry paratrooper, a combat veteran of Vietnam, decorated for valor. You spent much of your military life in operational commands, where you had trips in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you advised senior defense officials with multiple visits during the surge period, and you provided assistance directly to General David Petraeus. And in December of 2018, you received the Ronald Reagan Peace Through Strength Award at the Reagan Library, the first military official to ever receive that award. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that was quite a humbling experience. You know, you get a number of awards when you're in a position like me, and you're certainly grateful for all of those. But that award really got to me, to be frank. I mean, I have tremendous regard for Ronald Reagan and what he stood for, and what his legacy is, and I was honored.
Are you impressed with the foreign policy of the current president, President Trump?
Generally speaking, yes. I do have some difficulties with certain aspects of it, but I think what the administration truly got right is they set the strategic framework for how the world truly is. And that was expressed in the national security strategy that they published in their first year in office, which even then was unprecedented. And they set a strategic framework that laid out in the world that we are really in an era of big power competition, namely with Russia and China, who want to destroy the international order that has existed for 70-plus years, principally designed to prevent major conflict like a World War III again. And I think those institutions have served us well. They want to depart from them because of their own national interests. And also the regional hegemony of Iran and their malign and aggressive behavior and what they have done in the Middle East and also globally in terms of state-sponsored terrorism. North Korea, a rogue state with nuclear weapons, threatening the use of them. Certainly when that strategy was crafted, now at least we're talking to each other. And, of course, radical Islam. Middle East, the breeding ground for it, but the truth is it's on just about every continent, and it's thriving, and it's growing. So that strategy that they identified, I think they got about right. It was a major departure from, I think, the pretend strategy that we had under the Obama administration, where we did not want to step up and identify these challenges in the world. I think, I'm only speculating now, largely because they didn't want to have to deal with them and be held accountable for a strategy to cope with these realities.
Isn't non-involvement or non-engagement or a pretend strategy, isn't that provocative? I mean, our enemies see it, and they say, okay, Obama or whomever, they're saying this, but they don't really mean it. And then you have the invasion of Crimea. And then you have the beginning of these phony islands in the South China Sea. And then you have Russia moving into Syria and so forth and so on. I want to break each one of these down. Let's start with China. I'm just a pedestrian, but I see China as a major, major threat because of all the focus and resources they're putting into their military, and not just, troops. Their strategic decisions, their space warfare activity that they're really leading on, stealing our technology, which they not only use for civilian purposes but military purposes, constantly claiming more and more navigable waters that belong to the Philippines or belong to Japan. And do you see China as the grave threat that I do?
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, so does the administration. The National Defense Strategy identified China as the #1 strategic long-term threat to the American people and the security of the United States. I spent a year-long effort on a commission looking at the National Defense Strategy and also how it's being implemented. So I'm intimately familiar with what our challenges are here. First of all, many people in the United States, after Deng Xiaoping started to conduct economic reform and open up China's marketplace and move towards capitalism, fell in on China. Our business leaders fell in on them, strategists, analysts.
Like 25 years ago or so.
Yeah, 2+ decades, absolutely right. And the thought is that if we help China along in terms of developing them economically, that political reform will follow. Well, we lost that bet, because that hasn't happened. China has doubled down on authoritarianism. They are fundamentally run by a very closed Chinese Communist Party. When you think of China, you just shouldn't think of all the wonderful things that's inside the culture of that country. You've got to think about who runs it. Chinese communists run it. And they run it with absolute iron hand and control of the people. What they're about is now in writing and in public discourse. It used to be in the closet, so to speak, until President Xi came along. And he has set some serious, formidable goals for them. One, to dominate and control the Pacific, the Asia-Pacific region at the expense of the United States, and to try to drive us out of there and cut off the relationship that we have with our allies. Two, is to replace the United States. In the late 2030s, early 2040s, replace the United States as the world's global leader. And they are about doing this, and they have a couple of pillars to accomplish it. One is they're economic predators, and they use that engine of investment in emerging countries to pull them to them with some pretty tough behavior, which they put money into these countries. The countries default on loans. They take over the infrastructure projects that they were promising. They don't deliver a quality product. As a matter of fact, they only use Chinese labor when they're doing it, and they insist on Huawei, their service system, to be the main driver in that country, and their telecom units as well, which means they're taking over the personal intelligence of the people in that country for generations to come. They're opening up seaports because they want to be a global power like the United States, so they have a Navy base in Djibouti. They have another one that they're developing in Pakistan, and they are taking over many of the ports that are in the key choke points around the world in terms of operating those ports.
Who runs the Panama Canal?
China.
China runs the Panama Canal.
They help operate it.
Mm-hmm.
They
have a foothold there, effectively.
They have a foothold there, and for why? For obvious reasons. It's of strategic influence in the world today, and it helps to control commerce. They're South China Sea. They've militarized the South China Sea, which they told President Obama they really weren't doing, but everybody knew they were doing it, to include our intelligence services that were working for President Obama. They militarized the South China Sea because half of the world's economy passes through the South China Sea. And in a time of conflict or unrest, they want to have control. 62% of their oil comes out of the Middle East. They know that the United States carrier battle group could tie that up in terms of confrontation, and it's the Achilles heel right now of China. That is why the port exists in Djibouti. That is why they're building another one in Pakistan near the Indian Ocean. They want to have economic influence initially that will give them geopolitical influence and ultimately control.
What you're suggesting here is they are preparing for, not necessarily ready to launch, preparing for an offensive war against the United States. Why else would they be doing all this?
Okay, that's a great question. And I'm going to disagree with that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, they saw Desert Storm, 1991, the prowess of the United States. Before that, we had been involved in Vietnam, protracted war, and on low technology. We recovered from that largely due to the Reagan administration, which got us on a proper footing with the Soviet Union and upscaled all of our military capabilities. The American people didn't really know how good we got until they saw that. Well, guess what? So did Russia, and so did China see that, and it spooked both of them. As a result of that, and then the Iraq invasion in 2003 was another data point for them. They made this conclusion. One, we don't want to fight a war with the United States, a conventional war, a high-end war, because of the capabilities they have. Two, what we need to do is get those capabilities ourselves to a certain degree, and in certain cases, have special capabilities that the United States doesn't have. So in the event we have to fight that war, that we're not going to be disadvantaged. But here's the key thing that they've done. China wants to avoid conflict with the United States, so they have developed what I'm calling gray zone operations to conduct operations below the level of conflict that will get them the same results that conflict would get, which is what? Geopolitical control and influence. So South China Sea, East China Sea, areas around Japan and Taiwan are all about intimidation, coercion, undermining civil society, undermining governments, taking over media operations that have the spin that they want as far south as Australia. This is a major campaign. They have 130,000 commercial fishing boats that work for the PLA. It's the People's Liberation Army, all militarized with proper GPS and also radio communications to do what? To intimidate and coerce other fishing rights that countries have in the regions. Day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, they're wearing down these countries in terms of their own sovereignty. They violate their air and maritime rights on a regular basis. And they're trying to demonstrate to those allies, to those countries who are mostly all allies of the United States, that look, the United States can't help you here. You want to be successful in this region and have some degree of sovereignty, you're going to have to work with us.
When we come back, I want to ask you about the Chinese and what they're doing in space. And it appears India has awakened to what China's doing, too, when we return. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, most weeknights you can watch Levin TV. Levin TV. Just go to blazetv.com/mark to sign up, blazetv.com/mark, or give us a call at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We'd love to have you. We'll be right back. Now, General Keane, as I mentioned before we left, they're also militarizing space. The Russians are, too. We'll get to them in a moment. They're militarizing space to do what?
Well, first of all, they recognize how dependent we are on space technology. So they have, many, many years ago, they began to develop anti-satellite kill capability. And now it's a major endeavor of theirs. And here's the reason. Obviously, GPS and all the location would be taken out by that, all of our communications, but all of our weapons telemetry. So when you see cruise missiles flying and precision-guided munitions coming out of airplanes, all of that is controlled by satellite technology. And they would actually bring us to our knees if they took those satellites down. The president is right about making sure we have an emphasis on space, because eventually space will be weaponized. We will have capabilities flying around in space on space stations that will be weaponized to kill other things that are passing through space, like missiles, airplanes, or whatever. is passing through there, they're going to take it out. So we've got to stay involved, technology and space. The Chinese, in some respects, have caught up to us in terms of satellite technology, but they're ahead of us in terms of anti-satellite technology.
Because I read that the Obama administration cut off resources for it. And so the Chinese are moving as fast as they can, and the president's trying to play catch-up to what the Chinese have done. What are we doing about all this? What are we doing about China?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the president, I think, is absolutely right in taking China on economically. It's obviously not my expertise, but nonetheless, clearly, intellectual property theft, forcing joint ventures on our business companies, and the tariff imbalances are pretty significant. Endeavors of the Chinese, they've gotten away with it for years. This is something that the president's been talking about for 20-something years. So he's absolutely right about doing it, and I give them plenty of credit. I think we still don't have a comprehensive strategy to deal with China's gray zone operations, which intimidates and coerces our allies. While the military can play a role there, and we're doing some of that by navigating through the South China Sea and East China Sea when we feel like it, even though China says that's our waterway. It's not. It's international waterway, but they claim it. That's important. But we need a whole of government strategy. We need a political, economic, military aspect of it. We need an information campaign. The Chinese, what they do domestically, they're a repressive society. And what they're doing around the world in terms of their cyber offensive capability, we've got to expose that. And they're paranoid and insecure about what the Chinese Communist Party actually does. And they kind of keep a lot of that in the closet. We got to pull back the veil of mystery that surrounds all of that, get all of our allies involved in that as well, and push these guys back into a box. And a lot of that will take non-military comprehensive strategy to do. I think we need to do some work there. The second thing is...
Who is we? Where do we... The president makes a decision. He says, okay, do what General Kane said. Who does that? That's part of the problem, isn't it? Which department, which office?
Well, that's a great question, and, so that our viewers can understand that. When the president makes a decision, look, I want to do something about China. He doesn't have to get into the details about it. I want to push back on these guys. I think our strategy is right. They are threatening to us. They're our number one threat. Put together a strategy to do that. That is the province of the National Security Advisor. The director of the National Security Council is one and the same person. They bring the whole of government effort together in terms of what is the overall strategy and what are the elements of the implementation of that strategy. Bring that to the president, put some options in front of him, associate the risk with each option, let him make some decisions about doing all of it.
So John Bolton would be the...
John Bolton now, H.R. McMaster before that.
Okay. Now, India. India obviously is a very big country with a lot of people. Their military is certainly not up to the standards as the Chinese, but apparently they're starting to pour a lot of resources into their military because, like with all the countries in the region, China's pushing, and they're pushing India too. Do you know what India is trying to do to respond to this?
Well, militarily, they're certainly increasing their capability. They are very concerned about China's predatory nature in their region. China is in the Indian Ocean every single day. By the way, just as a data point, China now has more combat ships than the United States Navy. And they're going to go right past us in all of this. Now, people say, well, they only have 2 aircraft carriers. Well, they're never going to have as many aircraft carriers as we do because they're not certain you can protect those. Given the missiles that China has, they know that they can take down our aircraft carriers and our surface ships. Not easily, but they know if they swarm missiles at them, they likely can do that. So they know how vulnerable they are. But the point is, India is intimidated by China's behavior. They have been aligned with Russia for military capability, as you know, for years. But we have made inroads into India, and I think we're getting closer to them than we've ever been in a generation. Why? Because we both see the domination of China and what they're seeking in that region at the expense of the countries in that region.
And they have a Western-friendly prime minister over there now, too. And,
Very much so.
yeah. We'll be right back.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm John Scott. Special counsel Robert Mueller's office makes public its sentencing memo on former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. The memo, submitted last night but released today after being reviewed and parts redacted. It accuses Manafort of, quote, repeatedly and brazenly violating the law.
Once Congress gets its hands on that report, any member of Congress can bring it to the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate and release it with impunity. There's no legal recourse against them.
I mean, Chris, that's probably going to happen.
Well, I think what the judge is talking about there, I'm assuming it's the speech and debate clause. And he's right on one hand that as a technical matter, any member of the House can go to the floor, the Senate floor, and effectively say anything they want without fear of prosecution or other consequences. In this case, I think it would be more likely that certain members of Congress would want to leak certain aspects of the report, but not do it wholesale. I think they'd rather leak it and not know who the source was if they decide to do that.
Well, Michael, wouldn't leaks, selective leaks, wouldn't that be worse as opposed to just letting the whole thing out? I mean, there could be areas of the report where someone is written about but not charged. And, under DOJ regulations, they generally don't do that, except, of course, in that two famous cases with Hillary Clinton and Comey.
Well, and it's true. I mean, one of the reasons you have the rule that keeps people who are not charged, even like federal grand jury secrecy, you don't want to come in and destroy somebody's life, their reputation, their career, over conduct that, in fact, that they weren't charged with. What's interesting, though, to me, and I think what we need to watch out for, even as you played sort of the lead into our segment, was the fact that the president is already attacking the report. He's already making comments about it being a hoax, it being and basically sort of skewing it as it's there. So I'm not sure I worry about leaks and things coming from members of Congress. It may, in fact, we may see things coming from the White House. Remember that all through this investigation, it's been remarkable at the way Bob Mueller's team has been basically clear of leaks. There are plenty of other leaky sieves in Washington, D.C. Doesn't seem to be out of the special counsel's office.
Well, I mean, you raise a good point. Critics say there has already been collusion, coordination among the meetings with the Russians and some Trump officials, this sort of thing, meeting with, they say, known Russian intelligence agents and communications. They've been charged with this type of thing. So what if, it comes out and it clears the president completely, Michael? I mean, how does he say, it's a witch hunt then?
Well, and I think that's an interesting idea. And usually when somebody has sort of a clear conscience, they don't come forward and attack something before it comes out because they know that they're going to be exonerated by the information that comes forward. But I think what you've got to look at, what we are just in the public sphere, what we already know. You've got the Michael Flynn information that's out there. You've got whatever's going to come from Cohen. We know about the Trump Tower meeting. We know that polling data was shared now with Russian operatives. We know about the idea of building a tower in Moscow that was not disclosed and contacts and business associations there. We know somehow, for some reason, we don't have the president's tax returns. So from the public side, we're operating with already this little bit of information that seems to give us an indication that there's information there that, in fact, there may be some contacts that the president hadn't disclosed, and I really think that's why we're watching him attack Bob Mueller. He's done this where he attacks the investigators, he attacks the lawyers and the legal staff of the team, and attacks the investigation. Now the report, which none of us have seen, but yet he's already taken shots at it.
Yeah, and now, Chris, the other hand, Kimberly Strassel in the Wall Street Journal wrote this, saying, quote, the collusionists need a new phase as signs grow that the special counsel won't help release their reveries of Donald Trump takedown. They had said Mr. Mueller would provide all the answers. Now that it seems they won't like his answers, Democrats and media insist that any report will likely prove anticlimactic and inconclusive. So then, if the report doesn't get what they want, Chris, do they come out and, say, well, it's his finances and everything else?
Well, I think what's going to happen is if this report is issued and it doesn't have the gotcha moment or gotcha moments that some people want, I think what you're going to expect to see here is an uptick in investigative activity, particularly in the House, but also by state attorneys general, that they'll take whatever information is in the Mueller report that for jurisdictional or other reasons Mr. Mueller could not pursue, and they'll pursue it, and they'll probably take this into the next couple of years.
And then on the other side, Michael, Adam Schiff, the congressman who's chairman of the Intelligence Committee, has been a longtime a critic of the president. He wrote this in a special letter to Republicans, urging Republicans to come out and support everything. He writes that Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III may soon conclude his investigation and report. Depending upon what is in that report and what we find in our own investigations, our nations may face an even greater challenge. Well, I am alarmed at what we have already seen and found of the president's conduct and that of his campaign. I continue to reserve judgment about what consequences should flow from our eventual findings. I ask you, to the Republicans, to do the same. So, Michael, what do you think, will happen, and what do you think the upshot of all this, no matter what's in the report?
Sure. I mean, I will tell you that if I were in the administration or I were a Republican backing the president right now, that I would take no great comfort in the sentencing memorandum that came out, that the document that's come out today dealing with Paul Manafort. Bob Mueller's played this exactly as he should. He's talking about defendant by defendant. But when you take the cumulative evidence as a whole, you start to see things that were not disclosed, and you see judges doing things. They have information that we don't have. Some of the Intelligence Committee has information that we don't have. Bob Mueller certainly has information that we don't have yet. So just with the information that's out there, I would take no great comfort in it. I will say this. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not a president can be indicted, and I appreciate my colleague talking about what state attorneys general may do. Remember that there's nothing that would prohibit in the OLC report, the legal counsel report, and guidance memo that would suggest that the president's business could not be charged in some type of conspiracy, that couldn't happen there. And so, again, I just would say I don't see anything to really give much. There's not a lot here that changes the day. But we do know things from the past, and I just don't think that I would take great comfort in it if I were a presidential detractor, nor would I take great comfort in it if I were a presidential supporter. We are where we are, but this information is going to continue to come out, I'm sure. I don't think we're near the end. I think that there'll be other charges and indictments and things that come down. Some of those may be sealed now. That may be something that Bob Mueller lays out in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, that's a good point. Michael Moore, Chris Stazak, thank you. And no matter what happens, the Southern District and other prosecutors still have their claws into some of this too. Thank you both. Arthur.
Right. Thank you. Now,
a Florida judge has ruled federal prosecutors working under then Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta broke the law in 2008 when they concealed a plea agreement from victims of sexual abuse by wealthy hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein. Rick Leventhal reports on what this means for the more than 30 underage victims.
Once seen as a rising star in the Trump administration, Labor Secretary Alex Acosta is on the defensive after a federal judge ruled prosecutors under his control broke the law back in 2008 when Acosta was U.S. Attorney in Miami. The case in question involves wealthy financier Jeffrey Epstein, who faced up to life in prison over allegations he sexually molested dozens of underage girls at his Palm Beach mansion after they were hired to give him massages. Epstein never went to trial. His lawyers reached what the Miami Herald called the deal of a lifetime with Acosta's prosecutors, who a judge found failed to discuss the arrangement with more than 30 young victims.
Mr. President.
The president was asked about Acosta in the Oval Office.
I really don't know too much about it. I know he's done a great job as labor secretary, and that seems like a long time ago.
Epstein's deal allowed him to plead guilty to just 2 state prostitution charges for an 18-month sentence and registered sex offender status. He also had to pay restitution to some of the victims who were kept out of the loop during negotiations. Florida federal court judge Kenneth Marr wrote Thursday, particularly problematic was the government's decision to conceal the existence of the agreement and mislead the victims to believe that federal prosecution was still a possibility, while the government spent untold hours negotiating the terms and implications of the agreement with Epstein's attorneys. Scant information was shared with victims. The judge did not overturn Epstein's plea deal. Instead, he gave federal prosecutors 15 days to confer with the victims and their attorneys to come up with a settlement. It's still possible the case could be reopened, and Epstein and others could be criminally charged. In New York, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
Well, they'll be meeting again. But what do we really expect to come out of the second nuclear summit between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un? We will preview that big meeting that'll happen this coming week straight ahead here on the Fox News Channel.
If I were not elected president, you would have been in a war with North Korea. We now have a situation where the relationships are good, where there's been no nuclear testing, no missiles, no rockets. We got our hostages back. We have many of the remains back and coming back rapidly.
President Trump defending the results of his first summit with Chairman Kim Jong-un as he prepares for his second nuclear summit with the North Korean leader in Vietnam this upcoming week. With analysis on what we can expect, let's bring in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. So glad to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Always good to be here, Arthel. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you make of President Trump's comments they're saying that were not for him that we would be at war with North Korea?
Well, I'm not sure that, we can really say what may or may not have happened had he not come into office. But what you can say for sure is that we're at an opportunity right now. We have a chance, to possibly even reach, peaceful outcome of this war, which we haven't had in decades. And he's absolutely right on all his comments that since he's come into office, there hasn't been the missile test, the nuclear test. We have gotten hostages back, all of those things. And those are all positive things, and all of which lower the tensions and increase the chances at peace. So he does deserve some credit for that.
Okay, very good. What is or should be President Trump's #1 objective in this second summit?
Well, without question, the #1 objective is the search towards peace. Many people are saying that it should be the CVID, the irreversible nuclear deterrent, and all those. And I'm saying that should not be the primary objective, because if you set that as your primary objective and you don't get it, then people say, well, then now that we have to look back to the military option. And I'll tell you, we don't need that to keep us safe, because we are safe right now. Our overwhelming military and conventional nuclear deterrent keeps us safe no matter what happens with these. But this second meeting especially does give us genuine chance to reach a peaceful outcome, which would even eliminate the concern about future possibilities if it goes well.
Now, Professor Sung-Yoon Lee from Tufts University told Eric earlier that not in a confrontational manner, but forcefully, President Trump should look Chairman Kim in the eye and say, tear down this wall of deception. I mean, so Colonel Davis, listen, Kim Jong-un and his family, they've been playing a game of deception for generations. Why should we expect them to be on the up and up now? I mean, what has changed for North Korea?
Well, certainly they have been that, but they have also been a very rational thinking administration, especially since Kim has come to power. And I think Trump is right that he has the ability to negotiate with him, because however bad Kim Jong-un is, and he is terrible, he's done some awful things, but he also wants to survive and wants to live. And so he will be willing to make negotiations and engage in diplomacy with us if he can be convinced that over time that can work out to his favor. And if it lowers the tensions and removes the chance for war, that benefits everyone. But I will say that we have to really also understand, everyone needs to know this is something that's going to take some time. We're not going to go in there and get a full CVID after this next meeting. It's going to take a number of years, and I think people need to understand that.
It's going to take years, you said.
Yeah, it probably will, because we have to build trust in both directions, because this thing's been going on for decades.
You mentioned the word trust. That's the thing, though. After this summit, I mean, can we trust the Kim regime to allow the U.S. full and unfettered access to any and all suspicious nuclear sites to see if, in fact, they're beginning to denuclearize, and that Kim Jong-un is not just showing us, or the agents there, only the sites that he just doesn't need anyway?
Well, to kind of paraphrase Ronald Reagan, you trust but verify. So we can trust and get them to, hope that they're going to end up, with some written guarantees and some promises, but it's all going to come down to what actually happens. And do they produce that? Do they allow the inspections? And does our best intelligence, the best we can come up with, find out, is whatever they eventually declare, is that the sum total of it, or is there more? But I re-emphasize that no matter what happens and whether he does or doesn't come fully clean, our deterrent will always keep our country safe. So that's not at risk here at all.
Let's switch gears a little bit, give you 30 seconds on this. We're talking about what's different this time with North Korea. Kim Jong-un seems to crave a certain amount of celebrity. So perhaps that might be what is different, that he wants to be seen in a more favorable light somehow worldwide. And so now you have President Trump, who is a celebrity, meeting with this guy, and Kim wants what Donald Trump had in terms of his celebrity. I don't know. Does that play into this at all?
It is absolutely right. I think that's actually undervalued, because all of these things he's doing with diplomacy and wanting to have the world stage, that shows that he wants to live, meaning that he's not going to use those weapons that he has, which he considers a deterrent, on an offensive way, because that would immediately result in his destruction. And so he wants to live, so we can use that to our advantage to make sure that he, does continue to live by doing what we need him to do, i.e., coming clean on this nuclear issue.
Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you very much. Always a pleasure, sir.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, Arthel.
Thank you.
Well, back here at home in the southeast, where they got some severe weather this weekend, with parts of some states already underwater. Adam Klotz is on deck with the extreme weather forecast straight ahead. Weekend. Meteorologist Adam Klotz has been tracking the remnants and the storm from our Fox News Weather Center. Hi, Adam.
Hey there, Eric. This is a large storm, and it's going to give different folks a different type of precipitation. Actually, some snow moving across the upper plains, and that could turn into a blizzard. But the real concern, at least immediately, is going to be seeing this line move across the south, flooding, potentially some big severe thunderstorms, and maybe even a couple of tornadoes before it's all said and done. This is our severe threat overnight, so you're going through portions of Tennessee, stretching down into Mississippi. That means big thunderstorms with hail, with strong winds, but possibly some tornadoes. And if we zero in on this, the exact same area, actually we have a very high risk of at least a tornado or two spinning up in this region. It's going to be something to pay attention to, especially if you're across northern Mississippi into portions like Memphis, some of these areas. You're going to want to watch this one overnight tonight. Otherwise, though, even if you're outside of this area, it is a large, slow-moving system, and that means that there's going to be a lot of flooding. We're already seeing it move across the Nashville area and places off towards the west. This is going to continue to be a problem as this whole system eventually stretches into the mid-Atlantic. A lot of very heavy rain. Rivers will run higher and just generally flooding in the known areas. On the backside of this system, air is a lot colder, and that's where it's turning into snow. Everything here across the red, from the central plain states stretching up into the upper Midwest, all of that red, those are blizzard warnings. Means visibility is going to be down under a quarter of a mile, winds up to 35 miles an hour. It is going to be whiteout conditions with heavy snow, again, kind of training right through the same area again and again and again. So it's not a very wide area, but some of these spots we're talking about getting up to 12 inches to 24 inches of snow, as it's going to be some of those whiteout conditions from Omaha stretching up past Minneapolis and then in portions of northern Wisconsin. All areas to pay attention to. When does this happen? Well, here's our future radar, and here's where we currently sit. This is mostly going to be tonight and into early tomorrow morning. So there's the movement of this. Here we are at midnight. Still some of those thunderstorms moving across the southeast. Still the heavy snow moving across the upper Midwest. Eventually, by Sunday, this does run up along the mid-Atlantic, Eric, but I think at that point this isn't as big of a system. So the people in the middle of the country, those are the ones who really have to pay attention tonight and early tomorrow morning.
All right, folks in the South and Midwest, as you say, tonight and tomorrow, just be on the lookout.
Yep.
Thank you. Arthel?
Violent clashes breaking out at Venezuela's borders as opposition leader Juan Guaido works to bring in trucks filled with aid from neighboring nations despite objections from President Nicolas Maduro. The very latest in the next hour on Fox Report.